"May I play with you?" Renly asked, her voice trembling. The man before her was silent, his violin pressed tightly against his chest. The entire square fell completely silent. People watched, uncertain whether to cry or applaud. André Rieu slowly lowered his head, closed his eyes and raised his bow. As the first note of sorrow sounded again, no one held their breath. And what happened in that moment, no one in Boston would ever forget. Renly had never seen the world, but she had learned to hear it. The hurried footsteps, the distant voices, the patter of rain on glass. Everything was a picture to her. At 12 years old, her life fit into an old suitcase and a cracked violin she had received from Thaddeus, an elderly neighbor. It was the most valuable gift she had ever received. Since her father had left them, her mother, Sable, had been working as a housekeeper to earn a living for her daughters. Marlowe, the eldest, took care of Renly as best she could, but it was hard. Medical bills kept piling up. The treatment that could have stabilized her blindness was far too expensive. That's when Renly began playing in Copley Square. At first, people just walked by. Then some stopped. They threw coins, and every time she heard the clinking of metal, she smiled. But on that Saturday, the wind felt different. Her music sounded sad, and the sound echoed. Sable watched her from a distance, fighting back tears. Suddenly, a black car stopped at the corner of the square. People began to whisper. The door opened slowly, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. Renly, blind, continued playing until she heard another melody right behind her. Every day, Renly woke up early, tuned the strings of her violin, and went to the square, guided by Marlowe. It was her ritual. She played. Her sister watched over her. "It might rain today, Renly. Then I'll play faster before the sound gets wet." People passed by indifferently. Some children stopped curiously, others laughed. Thaddeus, the neighbor, sometimes brought fresh bagels and said, "Music keeps you upright, girl." But not everyone saw it that way. A grumpy man named Brixton, the owner of a nearby store, complained daily, "All this noise! This isn't a theater." One day he kicked over her coin box. The sound of shattering metal was the most painful sound Renly had ever heard. Sable wanted to confront him, but Renly held her back. "Leave him, Mum, he can't hear anything." The next morning, Renly returned to the square with determination. Marlowe walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. The streets of Boston were full of tourists and locals going about their daily business. No one seemed to notice the blind young woman with the old instrument. "This is good, Marlowe," Renly said as she heard the familiar sounds of Copley Square, the fountains, the cafes, the distant ringing of church bells. She opened her violin case and took out the instrument. The varnish was faded, the strings worn, but to Renly it was perfect. She began to play, a simple melody that Thaddeus had taught her, but today was different. The wind was colder. People walked by faster, and the box at her feet remained empty. An hour passed. 2. Still nothing. Marlowe became restless. "Renly, maybe we should go home. It's getting cold." "Just a little longer," Renly pleaded. "Mum needs the money." Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy, confident footsteps. They stopped right in front of her. "What's a little girl doing here all alone?" asked a harsh voice. It was Brixton. His shadow fell over her, though she couldn't see it. "I'm playing music, sir," Renly answered politely. "Music?" he scoffed. "That's harassment. You're scaring away my customers." "I'm just trying to help, sir. Help somewhere else." Before Marlowe could say anything, Brixton poured a bucket of water over Renly's violin case. The few coins inside were washed away across the cobblestones. Renly gasped. Her hands trembled as she felt for the now empty case. Marlowe burst out, "How dare you? She's blind. She's just trying—" "Then she needs to learn that the world isn't kind to the weak," Brixton growled as he walked away. Renly sat still, her violin pressed against her chest. She felt tears welling up but refused to cry within earshot. "Come on, Renly, let's go home," Marlowe said quietly. "No," Renly whispered. "Not yet." She placed the violin under her chin and began to play again. But this time the melody was different. It wasn't a cheerful song. It was a plea, an outpouring of everything she carried inside, the pain, the fear, the loneliness. And slowly, people stopped. An old woman cried silently. A young father placed his hand on his daughter's head and whispered something in her ear. A tourist lowered his camera and simply listened. One by one, they threw coins into the donation box. Not out of pity, but out of reverence. Marlowe watched with wide eyes. Renly, they're really listening. But Renly had already heard them. Not just the coins, but the silence between them. The silence of people who were truly listening to her. When the last note faded, soft applause broke out. And somewhere at the edge of the square a black car stopped. The next morning the sky was grey. Renly didn't know it, but this day would change everything. The wind blew fiercely, her scarf blew away, and Marlowe ran after it to catch it. In that moment, a black car stopped by the fountain. Inside, André Rieu watched her. He had returned to Boston for a private event, but something in that melody made him tell his driver to stop. "Wait here," he said. Renly played, but the strings were worn. The tone was weak but full of truth. Suddenly the bow slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. She bent down, feeling for it, but someone was faster. A kind hand caught the bow before she could find it. "Here. Thank you. Who are you?" "Just someone who listens." She smiled, not knowing who stood beside her. But before she could continue playing, she heard a familiar sound, the clinking of metal falling into her box. A lot of metal. She felt for it and found not just coins but also paper, dollar bills. "Sir, this is too much. For real music it can never be too much," the voice said. Somewhere in the crowd, someone recognized the man. A whisper spread like a wave. "Is that André Rieu?" Within seconds, phones appeared. People began filming. Marlowe ran back with the scarf and froze when she saw the man next to her sister. Her mouth fell open. André Rieu looked at the violin in Renly's hands. He frowned slightly. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the instrument. Renly hesitated but then nodded. Carefully he picked up the violin and examined it closely. The cracks, the worn strings, the damaged varnish. But he smiled. "This instrument has a soul," he said quietly. "It has known love." He tuned a loose string and gave it back to her. "Try again." Renly placed the violin under her chin and played. The sound was perfectly expressed. People stopped. Indigo, a passing journalist, turned on her camera. Soon dozens of phones were pointed at the two of them. Renly didn't understand, but she felt the sound multiply. Behind her another melody sounded, deep, powerful, moving. Startled, she paused. "Don't stop," he said. And then they played together. The sound echoed off the walls of the square. What had begun as a struggle for survival became a concert. People flocked in. First 10, then 20, then 50. The square filled with spectators, listening to the unusual duet. The world-famous maestro and the blind girl. But not everyone was happy. Brixton came out of his store, his face red with anger. He pushed through the crowd. "What is this circus?" he shouted. "This is my work area. You're blocking my business." André Rieu stopped playing. Slowly he turned and looked at Brixton. "What is your concern?" he asked calmly. "I see only a man who can't listen. Who do you think you are?" "Someone who understands what this world needs. And it's not anger. It's beauty," the crowd murmured. Someone shouted, "Let them play." Brixton looked around and realized he was alone. Ashamed, he retreated into his store. André Rieu nodded to Renly. "Shall we continue?" She smiled broadly and began again. This time she played an entire piece, a modified version of Ode to Joy. The notes flowed like a river across the square, and every listener felt an inner transformation. Marlowe stood at the edge, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had seen her sister play 100 times, but never like this. Never with such power. Sable arrived out of breath, still in her cleaning apron. When she saw Renly playing next to André Rieu, she collapsed in emotion. Indigo broadcast the video live. Within minutes, thousands were watching online. Brixton, the store owner who had insulted her, came out of the store and stood on the sidewalk. His expression was no longer angry. It was gentle. Renly, her eyes closed, guided the bow with a confidence she had never felt before. Every stroke was perfect. Every movement precise. André Rieu played beside her as if they had rehearsed together for years. He adapted to her tempo, followed her breath, let her lead. When the last chord faded, there was complete silence. Then thunderous applause broke out. André Rieu set his violin aside and knelt beside Renly. Gently, he took her hand. "Renly," he said quietly, "do you know what music really is?" She shook her head. "It's a bridge between hearts. And today, with that bridge, you touched thousands of people." Renly felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "But I'm just a girl. I can't do anything." No, he said firmly. You can do anything, because you have something most people lose. You don't play for fame. You play because you must, because it's inside you. Sable pushed through the crowd and sank to her knees beside her daughter. Renly, my sweet girl. Mum. Renly turned her head. Why are you crying? Because I'm proud. So incredibly proud. André Rieu stood up and looked at the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out, this is Renly. Remember her name because she will change the world. People cheered. Phones clicked incessantly, and somewhere in the crowd stood Thaddeus, the elderly neighbor, with tears in his eyes. He had always known Renly was special, but this surpassed everything. Indigo stepped forward with her camera. Mr. Rieu, may I interview you? He smiled. Of course, but interview her, he said, pointing to Renly. She's the star here. Indigo knelt beside Renly. Renly, how do you feel? Renly smiled shyly, confused, but happy. Did you know André Rieu was standing next to you? No, I just knew someone was playing with me, and that it sounded beautiful. The video spread rapidly within an hour. News stations reported on it. Blind girl sings duet with André Rieu on the street, was the headline on the front pages of Boston newspapers. But André Rieu wasn't after fame. He waited until the crowd had thinned a bit, then spoke privately with Sable. Mum, your daughter has talent, real talent. I know, Sable said quietly, but we don't have money for lessons. We can't even afford eye treatment. André Rieu looked at Renly, who still clutched her violin as if it were her most precious possession. Can I help? He asked simply. Sable looked at him in surprise. Mr. Rieu, we can't. I'm not asking. I'm offering. He pulled a business card from his pocket. Call me tomorrow, we'll arrange everything. Lessons, medical care, everything she needs. Sable couldn't believe her ears. Why? Why are you doing this? Because music knows no boundaries. And because Renly reminded me today that true beauty doesn't come from perfection, but from passion. He smiled at Renly, who recognized his voice. Sir, she said, will you come back? Always, he promised. Always. The next morning the square was different. The video had spread across the country. Journalists, onlookers, and musicians came to see the blind girl who had touched André Rieu so deeply. But she didn't seek fame. A week later, he returned quietly. He handed Sable an envelope. It was a music scholarship for Renly, a health insurance card, and a handwritten letter. Some play to be heard. You played to heal. You healed me. Sable read the words 3 times before she understood what they meant. Her hands trembled as she pressed the letter to her chest. She sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of unpaid bills. And now everything was different. He really did this for us. Marlowe looked over her shoulder and read along. Mom, this is real. This is a full scholarship. Renly can go to the conservatory and get medical care. Sable's voice failed. She can get the treatment. Renly sat at the kitchen table, her violin on her lap. What's going on, Mom? Sable knelt beside her and hugged her tightly. Your life just changed, sweetheart. Everything has changed. That night, Sable couldn't sleep. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years of struggle. The nights she had cried, uncertain how she would make it through the next month. The times she had to take Renly to the hospital and felt guilty because she couldn't afford the treatments. And now, through a miracle, through a single magical moment in the square, everything had changed. The next day they visited the conservatory together. The building was impressive, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of light. Renly couldn't see it, but she felt the energy of the place. The echo of thousands of pieces of music resonated through these walls. Welcome, Renly, said Director Mr. Ashford. He was a tall man with a kind voice. Mr. Rieu has told us a lot about you. Thank you for the invitation, sir. Renly, it's an honor to have you here. Your talent is extraordinary. He led her through the hallways, past the rehearsal rooms where young musicians were practicing. Renly listened to every note. The violins, the pianos, the cellos. It was as if she were in a palace of music. This will be your room, Mr. Ashford said. Open the door. Here you can practice whenever you want. Renly reached in and felt the room. In the corner stood a piano, in the middle a music stand, and under her feet a soft carpet. It's perfect, she whispered. In the following weeks, Renly began taking lessons at the Boston Conservatory. Her teacher, an older woman named Ms. Calloway, was amazed by her hearing. Renly, you have perfect pitch. That's rare, very rare. What does that mean? Renly asked. It means you can recognize every note without comparison. You can hear what others can't hear. Renly smiled. Maybe because I can't do anything but listen. Ms. Calloway worked patiently with her, but soon noticed that Renly hardly needed any corrections. The girl had a natural sense for music that couldn't be taught. It was simply in her blood. You play with your soul, Ms. Calloway said one day. I can't teach that. Either you have it or you don't. And you have it. During lessons, Renly met other young musicians. At first, some were skeptical. How could a blind girl keep up with them? But as soon as they heard her play, all doubts vanished. A boy named Caspian who played cello became her friend. Renly, would you like to rehearse with me? He asked her one day. Of course, she said. What do you want to play? Bach. His cello suites, but I thought we could arrange them for violin and cello. They rehearsed for hours together, in perfect harmony. Caspian was amazed at how easily Renly adapted, how she seemed to anticipate each of his movements before he even made them. How do you do that? He asked after a rehearsal. You always know when I change tempo, when I speed up or slow down. It's like you can see into my mind. Renly smiled. I don't just listen to the notes, Caspian. I listen to your breath, to the movement of your bow, to the tension in your body. Music is more than just sound. The medical treatments also began. Dr. Sterling, an eye specialist, examined Renly thoroughly. The good news, he said after the first week of tests, is that we can stop the progression of the disease. The treatment we'll use is new but very promising. And the bad news? Sable asked, her voice tense. We can't promise she'll ever see again. The damage that's already occurred is permanent, but we can prevent it from getting worse. Renly sat quietly on the examination table, her hands folded in her lap. That's okay, she said. I already see in my own way. Dr. Sterling looked at her admiringly. You're a special girl, Renly. No, she said simply. I'm just me. The treatments were sometimes painful, sometimes exhausting, but Renly never complained. She went to the clinic every week, underwent the treatments, then went home to practice violin. Mum, it doesn't hurt when I play, she said one day after a particularly strenuous treatment. Music makes everything better. Sable kissed her forehead. You're so strong, sweetheart. No, Mum. I just learned that some things are worth it. Meanwhile, Renly returned to the square. Not for money, but out of love. Every Saturday she played, and every Saturday hundreds of people gathered to listen to her. Thaddeus always came to watch, proud as a grandfather. He often brought fresh donuts and sat on his usual bench to listen to every piece Renly played. You've come so far, girl, he said one day. When I gave you that violin, I knew you were special, but I never could have predicted this. Thank you, Thaddeus, for everything. No, child, thank you. You showed this old man that there's still magic in the world. Brixton, once her biggest critic, stopped complaining. Instead, he hung a sign in front of his store. Live music every Saturday at the square. Come and listen. One day, he came to her with a small box. Renly, this is for you. She reached for the box and opened it carefully. Inside was a new set of strings for her violin. Mr. Brixton, I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy, for everything. I was so foolish. Everyone can change, Renly said quietly. Music has that power. He nodded, touched her shoulder, and walked back to his store. His eyes were moist, but the most beautiful moment came on a cold December morning. The sky was grey, and fog hung over the square. Renly stood at her usual spot, playing for a small group of tourists wrapped in thick coats against the cold. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. May I play with you? She turned her head, her heart leaping. Mr. Rieu? Who else? The crowd cheered. André Rieu had returned, without announcement, without the press, alone with his violin. He wore a simple coat and scarf, his breath forming little clouds in the cold air. I heard you play here every Saturday, he said. I wanted to see how you're doing. Renly asked nervously, How am I doing? You've evolved, not just technically, but in feeling. Your music has gained depth. They played together like they had months ago. But this time it was different. Renly didn't play like a child who needed help. She played as an equal, her confidence radiating in every note. The piece they chose was Winter from Vivaldi's Four Seasons, fitting for the weather. The notes echoed across the square, cold and beautiful like falling snow. People stopped, stores emptied. Within minutes, a crowd of hundreds had gathered to listen. When the music faded, He embraced her. "You've grown, Renly. Not just technically, but in heart." "Thank you, Mr. Rieu, for everything." "No," he said, "thank you. You reminded me why I started making music." He gave her a small package. "Open it at home." That evening, Renly opened the package with Marlowe and Sable. Inside was a new violin. Not just any violin. A handcrafted Italian violin with her name engraved on the back. Renly Hayes, an artist who sees with the heart. Renly stroked the smooth wooden surface, feeling every curve, every detail. Tears ran down her cheeks. "This is too beautiful for me." "No," Sable said, her voice trembling. "It's exactly right." Months passed. Renly's life had changed in unexpected ways. The conservatory offered her not just lessons, but also a community, other young musicians who accepted her as she was. The medical treatments showed results. Although Renly was still blind, her condition stabilized. The doctors were optimistic that further deterioration had been stopped. But most importantly, Renly had found herself. She no longer played out of necessity, but out of passion. Her music had gained a depth that even experienced musicians admired. One day, Dr. Sterling called Sable into his office. His expression was serious, but not grim. "Mrs. Hayes, I have good and complicated news." Sable's heart pounded. "Please tell me." "The good news is that Renly's condition has completely stabilized. The treatment is working better than hoped. Her condition will not deteriorate further." "And the bad news?" "There's a new experimental procedure. It's risky and I can't guarantee anything, but there's a small chance we could partially restore her vision." Sable couldn't believe her ears. "How high is the chance?" "Maybe 20%, maybe less. And the procedure is intense. Recovery would take months." "What are the risks?" "If it doesn't work, everything stays as it is. But there's a very small risk of complications." That evening, Sable told Renly the news. They sat together on Renly's bed, the new André Rieu violin leaning against the wall. "What do you think? Do you want to try?" Renly was silent for a long time. "Mum, can I be honest?" "Always." "I don't know if I want to see." Sable was shocked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm happy the way it is. I have my music. I have you and Marlowe. I have my friends. Seeing would change everything, and I don't know if I want that." Sable hugged her. "It's your decision, sweetheart. No one can make it for you." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." In the following week, spring arrived. Flowers began to bloom, and the air became warmer. Renly could feel the change, the scent of new blossoms, the chirping of birds. She discussed the decision with Caspian during a rehearsal. "What would you do?" she asked him. "I don't know, Renly. It's such a big decision. Sometimes I wonder what the world looks like, what people look like, what you would look like." "Do you really want to know?" Caspian asked carefully. "Sometimes, but then I think, if I could see, could I still hear as well? Would my music still be the same?" "Your music comes from inside, Renly. That would never change." "Maybe you're right." She also discussed it with Ms. Calloway. "Renly, may I ask you something?" her teacher said one day. "Of course. Why are you afraid to see?" Renly was surprised by the direct question. "I don't know. Maybe because I'm afraid the world will disappoint me." "What do you mean?" "I've spent my whole life creating images of the world in my mind, based on sounds, on touch, on what people tell me. But what if the reality isn't like I imagine it? What if it's less real?" Ms. Calloway nodded understandingly. "That's a valid fear. But consider this. The world is what you make of it. Whether you see it or not, you create your own reality." One spring day, Sable received a call. It was André Rieu's assistant. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Rieu would like to invite Renly to a special concert. Would you have time next month?" Sable could hardly believe what she was hearing. "A concert?" "At Symphony Hall in Boston. A benefit concert for children with disabilities. Mr. Rieu would like Renly to play a solo." Sable's heart pounded. "I need to discuss this with her." When Renly heard the news, she was initially silent. Then she smiled broadly. "Of course I want to play." "Aren't you afraid?" Marlowe asked. "Why should I be afraid? I can't see anything. For me, every audience is the same." But deep down, Renly was afraid. This would be the biggest stage of her life. Thousands would listen to her. What if she made a mistake? What if she disappointed them? The following weeks were intense. Renly rehearsed every day, perfecting every detail of the piece she would play, Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. "Why did you choose this piece?" Caspian asked her one day. "Because spring is about rebirth, about new beginnings, and that's exactly what my life has been. A new beginning." Thaddeus came by every day to listen to her practice. "You're ready, girl," he said after a week. "More than ready." "How do you know?" "Because I heard the final chord and almost cried, and I'm an old man who doesn't cry easily." Renly laughed. "Thank you, Thaddeus." The day before the concert, Renly couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her new violin beside her, thinking about everything that had happened. A year ago, she had stood in the square hoping for a few coins for her mother, and now she would play in Boston's largest hall in front of thousands of people. "Are you awake?" Marlowe whispered from the other bed. "Yes. Can't you sleep?" "No, you." "Me neither. I'm too excited." They talked for hours in the darkness, sharing memories, laughing at old stories. Finally, Renly said, "Marlowe." "What?" "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not because of the concert, but because of who you are." "Thank you, Marlowe. That means everything to me." The evening of the concert arrived. Symphony Hall was filled to capacity, more than 2,000 people. Renly stood backstage, her new violin in her hands, her heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Sable and Marlowe stood beside her holding her hands. "We're so proud of you," Sable whispered. "I can't believe this is really happening," Renly said, her voice trembling. André Rieu came over. "Are you nervous?" She nodded. "Actually, more than just a little. But that's okay. Your nervousness means it's important." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Renly, you're not playing for others. You're playing for yourself. The rest will take care of itself. But what if I make a mistake? Then you make a mistake and the world keeps turning. But I don't think you'll make a mistake. Do you know why? Why? Because you don't play with your eyes or your hands. You play with your heart, and hearts don't make mistakes." He hugged her one last time encouragingly and went backstage. Renly heard the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, a young talent who has touched the hearts of thousands with her music. Please welcome Renly Hayes." The applause was deafening. Marlowe led her onto the stage. The audience applauded as she appeared. Her white dress gleamed in the spotlight. She couldn't see herself. She sat down on the chair provided for her, placed her violin under her chin, and waited until absolute silence had fallen. Then she began to play. The first notes filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The music was alive, full of hope, full of spring. It was as if the room itself came to life. Every note a new beginning, a new flower blooming. People in the audience began to cry. Parents held their children's hands. Thaddeus sat in the 5th row. Tears ran down his old cheeks. He thought back to the day he had given her the old violin, never knowing it would lead to this moment. Sable and Marlowe stood hand in hand backstage, watching the screen showing Renly. They could hardly believe this was the same girl who had played on the street for a few coins months ago. Renly felt every note in her soul. She was no longer nervous. She had arrived. This is where she belonged. Not necessarily on a stage, but in the music. Music was her home, her safe place, her way of communicating with the world. When she played the last note, there was a felt eternity of silence in the room. No one dared to break the spell. Then the applause broke out. It was deafening, overwhelming. People stood up, cheered, cried. It wasn't just applause for a good performance, it was applause for everything Renly stood for: hope, perseverance, the triumph of the human spirit. Renly stood and bowed. Her face beamed with a smile that warmed the entire room. André Rieu came onto the stage and hugged her. "You were perfect," he whispered in her ear. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked. "For everything." "No, Renly, thank you." Back in the dressing room, Brixton came to her. He had bought a ticket and sat in the audience, hidden in the last row, hoping no one would recognize him. "Renly," he said shyly, his voice almost a whisper. She turned her head toward the sound. "Mr. Brixton?" "Yes. I want to apologize for everything I said, for how I treated you. You were a child fighting for survival, and I was cruel." Renly smiled, and in that smile was not a trace of resentment. "Mr. Brixton, it's okay." "No, it's not okay. I was wrong. And tonight when I heard you play, I realized how much beauty I almost destroyed with my bitterness." "Music always forgives," Renly said quietly. "So do I." He nodded. unable to say more, and left with his head bowed and tears in his eyes. That night, Renly sat at home on her bed, her violin beside her. Marlowe sat down next to her. "Renly, are you happy?" "More than I ever thought possible." "What do you think will happen now?" Renly thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I know I'll keep playing. Not for fame, not for money, but because music makes me feel alive." "Have you decided about the surgery?" Renly nodded slowly. "Yes, I've decided against it." "Why?" "Because I realized I'm not broken. I see the world differently, but I see it. And I believe if I could see it like others do, I would lose what makes me special." Marlowe hugged her. "I'm so proud of you, and I'm glad you've always been there for me." The following Saturday, Renly returned to Copley Square. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The square was her home, the place where everything had begun. She played as always, and as always people came to listen to her, but this time something was different. People had brought their own instruments, guitars, flutes, an accordion, even a small drum. "May we play with you?" a young man asked shyly. Renly smiled broadly, her whole face beaming. Of course, music is for everyone. And so, in that square where she had once stood alone, something new was born. A community of musicians, united by a blind girl who had shown them what really matters. It wasn't just music, it was connection, it was love. It was the reminder that we are all part of something greater. Weeks later, Sable received a letter from the conservatory. Renly had been selected for a special scholarship for study abroad in Vienna, the capital of classical music, but Renly declined without hesitation. "Why?" Sable asked, surprised. "This is an incredible opportunity. Because my place is here, Mom, in this square with these people. This is where I belong." André Rieu learned of her decision and called her personally. "Renly, you could have a great career, concerts all over the world." "I know, Mr. Rieu, but career isn't everything. Happiness is more important. I'm happy here." He laughed, a warm, understanding laugh. "You're wiser than your age." "No," she said. "I simply learned to listen, not just to music, but also to my heart." On a sunny June day, the Boston City Council held a special event at Copley Square. Hundreds of people gathered, eager to see what would happen. The mayor stepped forward, holding a plaque covered with cloth. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to unveil something special today. This city has always loved music, but one person reminded us of its true power." He pulled back the cloth and revealed a beautiful bronze plaque embedded in the square. "In honor of Renly Hayes, the girl who taught us that beauty must not be seen, but felt." Renly stood before the crowd, her violin in her hands, visibly moved. "May I play something?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but determined. "Of course," the mayor said, his breath catching. She began to play, and as always, the world paused to listen. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't playing for money, not for fame, not for anything other than pure joy. André Rieu stood in the crowd, smiling. He had given many concerts, touched many people. But Renly had given him something he had forgotten, the reminder that music isn't about perfection. It's about connection, about truth, about love. When the music faded, he went to her and whispered in her ear, "Thank you, Renly. You taught me more than I could ever teach you." She smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. "We taught each other, Mr. Rieu." That evening, when Renly was back home, Marlowe asked her, "If you had the choice, would you want to see?" Renly thought for a long time. "Sometimes, yes. But then I realize I already see. I see through music. I see through sounds. I see through hearts." "That's beautiful," Marlowe said quietly. "Yes," Renly said, "exactly that." And so, the story of the blind girl didn't end with seeing, but with understanding. She understood that life isn't about what you miss, but about what you find. And what Renly found, no one could ever take from her. The power of music, the warmth of community, and the love of those who cared for her. Years later, Renly still played at Copley Square. She was now 16, and her music was more mature, deeper, and more beautiful than ever. Tourists came specially to Boston to hear her, but she didn't play for them. She played because it was inside her, because it was her way of speaking to the world. One day, while she was playing, she heard a familiar sound, another violin joining hers. She didn't need to ask who it was. She knew that style, that tone, that warmth. "Mr. Rieu," she said, smiling. "Always," he replied. And together they played. as they had so many times before. Not as teacher and student, not as star and fan, but as two souls speaking the same language. The language of music, the language of hope, the language of love. And as the last notes faded in the wind and applause swelled like a wave, everyone in the square knew they had experienced something special, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Some people hear music, others hear the soul, and sometimes they are one and the same. Renly Hayes taught the world that blindness isn't about what you can't see, it's about discovering new ways to experience beauty. She never regained her physical sight, but she saw more clearly than most people ever would. Through music, she found her voice. Through struggle, she found her strength. Through connection, she found her purpose. And in the heart of Boston, on a square where she once played for spare change, a bronze plaque reminds every passerby of a simple truth. True vision comes not from the eyes, but from the heart. André Rieu continued to play that melody, the one he and Renly created together, at every concert around the world. And every time he did, he remembered the girl who reminded him why music matters, not for applause, not for fame, not for money, but for the sacred connection it creates between human souls. Renly never became world famous. She never toured internationally. She never sought the spotlight. Instead, she chose something far more valuable, a life lived authentically, surrounded by love, filled with music, and rooted in community. Every Saturday, without fail, she returned to Copley Square, and every Saturday, people gathered, not just to hear her play, but to remember what she represented: hope in the face of hardship, beauty in the midst of struggle, light in the darkness. And as the sun set over Boston, casting golden light across the square, Renly would play one final piece before going home. Sometimes André Rieu would appear without warning and join her. Sometimes she played alone, but she was never truly alone, because music, as she had learned, connects us all. And in that connection, we find everything we've been searching for. The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They must be felt with the heart. Helen Keller. Renly Hayes proved this truth, one note at a time, in the heart of Boston, where a blind girl with a violin changed the world simply by being herself.